Well, I won't dwell too long on this slide because it repeats quite a lot of what Becky has already said. And this presents the well-being scores across the 5 countries where the questionnaires were fielded. But what I will do is just pause for a little bit and explain what these scores mean, because some of you will be more technical than others in the room, I imagine. There were 11 questions measuring financial well-being, and we put them through a principal component analysis that identified that we could return a single measure, which is our overall measure of financial well-being, but equally one could disaggregate it into 3 sub-measures, which are the ones you see below: meeting commitments, comfortable financially, and financial resilience. We then created a score using the coefficients and anchored it at 0 and 100. And I can go into the technicalities of how we anchored it, but sufficient to say we have the least capable replies and the most capable replies and anchored it. So this score is out of 100, and it's just so that we can compare. Coefficients are quite difficult to explain to policymakers. So we can see that Norway has the highest level, as we've been hearing, and Norwegians were really delighted because actually in the financial literacy, financial capability debate, they've not even got off the starting blocks. So I think that's a lesson for all of us. This is a country that's done very little. Quite a lot is done in schools, but there's not much underpinning to it, and there is no national debate on any of this. We're trying to kickstart it. I hope I can explain why I think Norway does so well as we go on. The lowest levels are found, sadly, in Australia and New Zealand. Across all the measures, there are about 20 index points below Norway, which is quite significant, actually. Canada and Ireland do relatively well. That said, you're 10 points behind Norway. Although Ireland does very badly on financial resilience, no better, in fact, than Australia and New Zealand. So that's a very quick overview of the scores. But then in the other 4 countries, not yet in Canada, we've segmented the populations to look at this data a different way. We segmented the populations according to scores on the overall financial well-being. So financially secure are people who score 80 or above. Doing okay, but little put by, 50 to 79.99. Just getting by is 30 to 49.99. Struggling financially is 30 or below. And you can see here the differences become even more stark. What is notable is that Norway has more than twice the population who are financially secure compared to the other 3 countries. The largest proportions of the population who are struggling are to be found in Australia and New Zealand, where it's actually 4 times the proportion in Norway, which I might say is quite disproportionate to the amount of money that Norway spends on research into payment problems. It doesn't do much in financial capability, but it's obsessed with people who have payment problems, and yet they're such a small number, and a very particular group of people, as I will come on to explain. And Australia and New Zealand double even the level in Ireland, despite the fact that Ireland was really badly hit in the financial crisis. I think that's quite interesting. Now, countries differ in the extent of the analysis that's been done, and the most detailed analysis has been done on the Norwegian data with 2 very lengthy technical reports exploring absolutely every box in that conceptual model and what drives it. So I can only give you very, very high level, but there is now a depth of understanding of how all these different factors interrelate. But what we can do across Norway, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand is look at regression models, models that will predict levels of overall financial well-being. And they started out with a very general model with everything that was in the conceptual diagram that I put up earlier. So it had knowledge, skills, and all the other things in it. And then tested down until we got a pretty efficient model. And what you see here, the numbers in this table are the standardized coefficients from those models. Sorry, not on this one. You see it on the next one. So in all those countries, we can see that financial well-being is determined by a combination of economic circumstances, income and substantial drops in income. But more particularly, it's not just what money you've got, but how you use that money is also very important. The size of the coefficient will indicate the size of the effect and reinforces what others were saying before me, that in fact two behaviours really do drive across all countries, drive overall financial well-being, and they are active saving and not borrowing for daily expenses. We did have other behaviours in the original model, like budgeting, informed decision-making, active product choice, and monitoring your finances. Those were either not significant, or, and I won't go into it in detail now, in the case of budgeting and monitoring, had a negative correlation. In other words, the higher your well-being, the less likely you are to be budgeting. And that I can explain later in questions, but it's not a straightforward relationship at all. So we see the two other factors are also very important. Financial locus of control. This is the extent to which you take responsibility for your own outcomes and decisions, as opposed to feeling it's nothing to do with you, its forces outside. You know, I spend because I live in a consumer society and I have to spend to keep up with all my friends, versus what I spend is down to me and I should be monitoring it. And financial confidence, it's a bit ambiguous which way this causality runs. You could be confident because your well-being is high, or your well-being could be high because you're a confident person and make confident decisions. In reality, I think it's both. These capabilities, we know from the Irish and the Norwegian data, are largely driven by personality, and knowledge and experience are much less important. Indeed, when we test in a stepwise regression model, for those of you who are more technical, we can test knowledge and it has a big effect. You put in personality and the effects of knowledge get drastically reduced by the introduction of personality. In other words, personality overrides your knowledge. That's something that I think doesn't come as a surprise. Also interesting on this slide is parents discussing money with you as a child has an effect, which is quite remarkable. This was a population between 18 and 80, and still we're picking up an effect, a positive effect. Not all surveys asked about financial education, but that's similar. If you had financial education in schools, you still see an effect in adults. So how countries compare on the key financial capabilities? Well, Norway had the highest scores on all behaviours except spending restraint, where they were slightly lower. And that is one of the Achilles heels in Norway, as I will explain. Canadians had the joint highest score for financial confidence and did relatively well on other measures. The Irish were the least likely to be exercising spending restraint, something I noticed when I was going over. I was an advisor to the Central Bank of Ireland after the financial crisis, and I was going over regularly to revise all their consumer protection legislation. And I was shocked by how people were still spending when the country was in terrible crisis. I couldn't believe it, and the Irish confirm that they are actually a nation of big spenders. And they had the lowest level of financial confidence. Australians and New Zealanders, this finding was met with great mirth when I was out in Australia for the launch. Not only were they the least likely to be active savers, but they had the lowest level of financial control. Now, anybody who's been out to Australia and New Zealand will know what is lovely about both countries is their wonderful laid-back attitude. Oh, she'll be right. Everything will come right. But it's their Achilles heel, and they say it caused great laughter. But people recognise that actually that it can be damaging, as you were saying, Celestina. So, very quickly, the other part of the equation is incomes, and this is where I think we get the explanation for Norway. There does seem to be a link between financial well-being and income inequality, not income levels. That makes sense. If you've got a lot of poor people, there are many more people likely to have their well-being damaged. And you can see that Norway not only has a high average income, but it has an incredibly low Gini coefficient. This is something that measures income inequality. 0 means everybody has identical incomes. 100 means it's absolutely, an incredibly unequal country. Norway has one of the lowest in the world, matched by a handful of other Scandinavian countries and a few very poor countries where everybody is equally poor. So they have the highest incomes, they have the lowest income inequality, but as well as the highest level of financial well-being. But I think what's interesting is we compare Canada with Ireland at very similar levels of financial well-being and very similar levels of income inequality, but average incomes are very different. We can't test this empirically, we only have 5 countries, but it's pretty clear to me that income inequality is playing quite a big part. So just quickly to sum up, I'm down to 0 minutes, so I'll do it quickly. Across all countries, financial well-being is determined by a combination of the money people have and how they use that money. Active saving, not borrowing for everyday expenses, have the biggest effects, but taking responsibility for one's own financial decisions and the outcomes is also important. However, there is a limit to what we can achieve by trying to change those propensities if income inequality is high. And where in the US, where we have very, very high Gini coefficient for a developed economy, until they tackle income inequality, their efforts to improve well-being through behavioural change will always be held back. There are, however, remarkable similarities across countries. I'm sure you must have been struck by how similar all the findings are. For me, that's quite gratifying. It means the survey instrument is working and working in meaningful ways. You wouldn't expect the findings to be fundamentally different. But it does mean that because there are so many similarities, we can learn a lot from one another. We're quite right to transfer learnings from one country to another. But equally, and I think this is important, there are some interesting differences. And they indicate where individual countries might want to focus their efforts. Thank you very much indeed.